if you remember, we have already studied about a particular city called Jerusalem when we were discussing about the life and teachings of Jesus Christ. Right? So Jerusalem was the city that was not only important for Christians, but it was also important for other religions. Jerusalem was therefore the center point that saw the growth of not only various religions, but also various cultures and various kinds of architecture. Right? Now, since Jerusalem was important for Christians, Muslims, as well as Jews, the question still remains, who had the control over this particular area? So Jerusalem is currently the capital of Israel. So as we were discussing that it was a melting pot of different cultures, and if you remember, we have also discussed about this particular monument, which is the Hayya, right? And we mentioned a point that this was established as a church and later it became a mosque, right? So then, because the Muslims started coming in at that point of time in Jerusalem, right? Because for them, Jerusalem was also a holy site. That particular church was converted into a mosque, right? So Jerusalem at a point of time was taken care by the Arabs, and they allowed the Muslim people to come in and visit all of their holy sites, right? After a point of time, there came a clash between these two religions, that was Christianity and Islam. So, in 1050 AD, there were two divisions between Europe and Middle East, okay, which was called the Christendom and the Muslim states that were in the lower half of this particular map, as you can see it marked in green. And these two set of states, they were constantly at war, they were constantly under political disputes and clashes. If we look into the 11th century, Byzantine Empire with its capital Constantinople, had already become a major Christian power, because as we have studied about Byzantine Empire, and you might remember that because of the growth of its trade routes, economy, as well as culture, it was flourishing. So Byzantine Empire therefore becomes the most important part in the Eastern Mediterranean here. Now also in the 11th century, we see a new power arise, right, which were the Seljuk Turks. Now the Seljuk Turks soon came in from Central Asian lands, right, and they converted to Sunni Islam. They took Islam and then they started barging into this territory and they started to gain lands. So of course they formed their own caliphates, their kingdoms, their empires, and soon they started to pose a threat to the Byzantine Empire. If you see here, we can locate the map and the route for the Seljuk Turks, right? From the heartland of the Seljuk, that is the Central Asian lands. Let me just mark it here. So, Central Asia, right? And they are coming in from here, moving to Damascus, and then posing a threat to Constantinople. Now, once they had, covered this entire area, in the Battle of Manzikert, the Byzantine Empire and the Seljuk Turks, where they had already established an empire, they came face to face, and in the Battle of Manzikert, the Christians faced a crushing defeat. So here in the Byzantine Empire, the Christians were already, facing a threat from the Muslims, and soon the Turks from this region took over most parts of Anatolia. So Anatolia here was already taken by the Muslims. Now here, if you remember the map, you know that the important cities for Christianity, which were Nicaea, Antioch, Jerusalem, these were also taken once Anatolia went into the hands of the Turks. So the Byzantine Empire, which had its seat as Constantinople, faced fresh attacks from the warring clans here at the the Seljuk Empire area. So the warlords were the ones who wanted to gain new territories, and that is why they kept moving towards the Constantinople, right? So with this particular arrow in orange, you can see that these warlords are moving up. Now, during that point of time, Constantinople, as in the entire Byzantine area, the empire, was under the rule of Alexius Comnenus. Now, Alexius Comnenus was, of course, unable to, stop the attackers from coming in. So, what did he do? He called in for the help of the Pope when Constantinople came under the threat of Turks. So this is the Byzantine Empire with its seat at Constantinople, and Alexius Comnenus gave called the Pope for help. Pope Urban II. Why so? Asking for help in the face of the Muslim expansion, because the Seljuks were coming in and they would soon capture Constantinople. His exact request was that they are to regain Jerusalem from the Muslims. Now, Pope Urban II was, of course, the head of the church, and he was the one who was looking after the institution. So he saw this particular call as a golden opportunity to, one, heal the rift between the Western and Eastern churches. If you remember, we have already discussed about the creation of churches, the division of Western and Eastern Roman Empire as well. Now, when that happened, the churches of West and East were also divided, right? So the rift that arose between the Western and the Eastern churches would then be healed if such a war would take place. Right? Second, he sought to establish his papal authority. So because he was the head of the church, he wanted that his papal authority to be established over the barons and bishops of the Western Empire. Because once the West and the East got divided, Western Empire's barons, the smaller kingdoms and their heads, they were not, adhering to Pope Urban II's policies or calls or anything. Though the main motive of Pope Urban II was, of course, to drive back the infidels. Who were the infidels? The Seljuk Turks. The Turks were the infidels, and regain most important sites of Christianity. Which were the most important sites of Christianity? Of course, Antioch, Nicaea, then we have Anatolia, but the most important one was Jerusalem. So what Pope Urban II did was, he gave a call at Clermont in 1095 AD, and he preached a gathering. So he summoned a gathering of the clergy and the nobles, and he also called on the knights, the foot soldiers, and the people who would be doing this job for him to go east and free Jerusalem. Now, interesting is the fact that, such a huge war would be fought, or these knights and foot soldiers would go ahead to Jerusalem, but what would they gain, in return of that? So the Pope, who was, he was intelligent enough to give them something very unique in return. So he gave them a spiritual return, right? He gave them a spiritual gift, which he stated, whoever for devotion alone and not to gain money or fame goes to Jerusalem to liberate the church of God can substitute this journey for all the penance. So the Pope, gave a call at Clermont to all of the Christian people. Why? To join a war against the Turks. And what was he giving therefore in return? What was the spiritual gain that these people would have? One was, if they fought in war, they would repay God for all their sins. And if they died in the crusade, they would directly go to heaven. Then if you remember, he called on the knights. And these knights and soldiers who have been fighting a lot of wars all their lives, for them this seemed like a golden opportunity to repay God for all their sins. Therefore, crusade becomes a series of religious wars that Christians and Muslims fought to secure the control of the holy sites. One of the holy sites was Jerusalem, which were considered sacred by both groups. So therefore, what was the purpose of these wars? Both Christians and Muslims wanted to regain Jerusalem, which was their holy site. For Christians, it was the site that, Jesus preached, he died, and then he was resurrected, right? And for Muslims, it was the site where the Prophet Muhammad also visited, and he, is perceived to have moved to heaven once, and then again he came back on earth. So that is why Jerusalem became so very important in this entire idea of war. Now, this word crusade comes from the word cross, because it was in the name of God, and cross was the symbol of Christianity, right? And crusade became a Christian holy war. So it was a holy war. It was sanctioned by the highest authority in Christianity, which was the Pope. The Christian soldiers would be then called crusaders, right? Therefore, in the span of 2 centuries, we see that there were 8 crusades that were held. So here we can see that the first crusade, of course, started from 1096, and the 8th crusade here ended in 1270, right? The first crusade is thought of as the most important, and we need to remember the date for essentially the first crusade, but we can look into the other dates as well. Why was first crusade so very important? The basic reason was the main city of Jerusalem had already come under the Christians in this very crusade. Along with it, the important sites like Nicaea, Dorylium, and Antioch went to the Christians in the very first crusade. Now, after the first crusade, these cities were gained and again lost, because as we saw that there were 8 crusades in a series, right? And finally, when this entire thing happened, at last, certain portions went to the Muslims, and certain portions, of course, were kept with the Christians. Now, if we come back to the impact of crusades on the spread of Christianity, how did these holy wars that was fought in the name of a religion, how did it affect the spread of Christianity then? First is the fact that it united the Christians. It brought the Western and the Eastern empires together. It made one Europe to fight against the Muslim states, right? And also it encouraged the entire Europe to oppose the Islamic threat and take the city of Jerusalem. So you see how in the face of political disputes, one religion was able to unite this divided kingdom, that was Western and Eastern Roman Empire. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. You can also register for free at deltastep.com or download the DeltaStep app to get access to all our 5,000 plus amazing videos as per your school syllabus. Master each topic with our adaptive practice technology. Get million plus questions with step-by-step solutions and unlimited mock tests. Get all your doubts resolved instantly, learn via games, and win amazing prizes like PlayStations and iPads. So at DeltaStep, learning is not just fun and easy, it is rewarding too. So register for free now.